Leo never imagined a trip to the animal shelter would unravel a secret locked behind a steel door. His parents had called it a family adventure, a cheerful Saturday outing to find a new member for their household of four. For Leo, it was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and a deeper, animal musk that clung to the back of his throat. A chaotic symphony of barks, yelps, and whines echoed off the concrete floors and cinder-block walls, each sound a desperate plea for freedom, for a hand, for a home. His older sister, Chloe, was already cooing over a litter of tumbling puppies, her voice adding to the din. His parents were talking to a volunteer, gesturing towards a friendly-looking golden retriever. They were looking for a dog that would fit, a dog that was easy, a dog that was already whole. Leo felt a familiar pang of invisibility, a quiet boy in a loud world, trailing behind a family that moved just a little too fast for him. He slipped away from the main kennel run, his worn sneakers silent on the slick floor. He was drawn down a quieter, dimmer hallway, one marked staff only with a faded piece of tape. He knew he shouldn't be there, but the relative silence was a balm. Here, the desperate energy was replaced by something heavier, a kind of resigned stillness. And that's when he saw him. In the very last kennel, a space larger and more isolated than the others, was a dog unlike any he'd ever seen. It was a giant, a patchwork of brindle and black fur stretched over a frame of thick muscle. It wasn't barking or jumping or whining. It was standing perfectly still in the center of the enclosure, head low, its body a sculpture of tension. A stark white sign was zip-tied to the wire mesh of the door, the red letters sharp and unforgiving, "Do not touch." Staff access only. Below it, in smaller black print, was a single name, Titan. The dog's stillness was more unsettling than all the noise in the other room. It was the stillness of a coiled spring, of a thundercloud waiting to break. His eyes, the color of burnt amber, were fixed on something far beyond the walls of his concrete box. They held a depth of sorrow that Leo, a boy who lived much of his life in quiet observation, recognized instantly. It was the same lonely ache he sometimes felt in the hollow of his own chest. His family's laughter drifted down the hall, a distant, cheerful sound from another world. They hadn't noticed he was gone. He took a hesitant step closer, his breath catching. The dog's head didn't turn, but Leo saw a subtle shift, a flicker of an ear in his direction. It was the smallest acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that he had been seen. In a place where every other creature was screaming for attention, this silent, broken giant had simply noticed him. A weary-looking staff member, with tired lines around her eyes, rounded the corner, her keys jangling. Her face tightened when she saw Leo. "You can't be back here, kid," she said, her voice raspy. "This section is off limits." She glanced at the kennel, her expression a mixture of pity and fear. "Especially him. Don't even think about it. He's not for adoption. He's complicated. The word hung in the air, a flimsy curtain trying to hide something much bigger. Leo looked from the woman's wary face to the dog's profound stillness, and a question began to form in his quiet heart. What secret was this place keeping? What had happened to this dog that made them build a fortress of warnings around his pain? He didn't know it then, but his simple, childish curiosity was about to become a fight for a life everyone else had already given up on. This was no ordinary shelter dog. He was a prisoner of a story no one had bothered to read. And Leo was the only one who had just opened the book. Before you judge an animal by the label on its cage, make sure you understand the language of its silence. Stay with us, and see what this shy boy discovered. Leo's mother found him a few minutes later, her voice a gentle chide. "There you are. We were getting worried. Did you get lost?" Leo just shook his head, the image of the still, silent dog burned into his mind. "I'm okay," he whispered. They left the shelter with promises to return for the golden retriever, once the paperwork was processed. The entire car ride home, Chloe chatted about names for their new puppy-to-be, while Leo stared out the window, the world outside a blur. The word complicated echoed in his head. It wasn't a word people used for dogs. Dogs were simple. They were happy or sad, hungry or tired. Complicated was for adults, for math problems, for feelings you couldn't explain. The next day was Monday, a blur of school bells and hallways crowded with kids who all seemed to know what to say. Leo moved through it all like a ghost, his thoughts miles away, back in that dim, quiet corridor. After his last class, instead of taking the usual bus route home, he felt an inexplicable pull. He walked the 20 blocks to the shelter, his backpack heavy on his shoulders. He didn't have a plan. He just had to see him again. He slipped in through the front door, keeping his head down, and made his way back to the restricted hallway. He was relieved to find it empty of staff. He stopped a safe distance from Titan's kennel, just outside the invisible line of warning. He slid down the wall, his back against the cool cinderblocks, and just Saturday. Titan was in the exact same spot, standing like a statue. For a full hour, neither of them moved. Leo didn't try to speak. He just watched, breathing in the quiet rhythm of the place. He noticed things he'd missed before. The way the dog's weight was shifted almost entirely to his front legs, as if his back end caused him discomfort. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through his left hind leg. It wasn't a shiver from cold, but a deep, rhythmic quiver, like a string pulled too tight. A volunteer eventually found him. This one was younger, a girl with bright pink hair and a kinder face. "Hey, you're not supposed to be here," she said, but her voice lacked the hard edge of the other woman's. "That's what everyone keeps saying," Leo replied softly, not taking his eyes off the dog. The girl sighed, her gaze drifting to Titan's kennel. "His name's Titan. He came in a few months ago. The story is he was found tied to a fence on the edge of town. Animal control had a hard time getting him. He snapped at anyone who got close." She lowered her voice. "They think he was used as a bait dog. Or just abused. He won't let anyone touch him. We have to use a catch pole just to clean his kennel." She looked at Leo, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Why are you so interested in him?" Leo thought for a moment. "He looks lonely," he said, the simplest and most honest answer he could find. The girl, whose name tag read Sarah, gave him a small, sad smile. "They are all lonely here. But his is a different kind of lonely." Leo came back the next day, and the day after that. It became his ritual. He would finish his homework on the bus, then walk to the shelter and spend an hour sitting on the floor near Titan's cage. He started talking to him, his voice a low, steady murmur. He told him about his day at school, about the book he was reading, about the annoying way his sister practiced her flute. He didn't expect a response. He was just filling the silence. Titan never barked, never wagged his tail, never approached the door. But Leo started to notice the smallest signs. An ear would swivel to track his voice. The dog's breathing would deepen, slowing from the tense, shallow pants to a more relaxed rhythm. One afternoon, Leo was sketching in his notebook, a habit he used to make himself invisible. He was drawing a picture of a wolf he'd seen in a documentary, all sharp angles and wild freedom. As he was packing up to leave, the sketchbook slipped from his lap, and the drawing fluttered through the air, landing right in front of Titan's kennel door. Leo froze. He expected a growl, a snarl, a lunge. The staff's warnings screamed in his head. Instead, something incredible happened. Titan took a slow, deliberate step forward. He lowered his massive head, his movements stiff and careful. He gently nudged the piece of paper, with his wet nose, sliding it back across the concrete floor until it was inches from Leo's outstretched hand. He then retreated to his spot, his amber eyes watching Leo with an unnerving intensity. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was an offering. A connection. In that one, simple gesture, Titan had communicated more than any barking dog in the building. He was not a monster. He was a prisoner, locked in a cage of pain and fear, and he had just pushed the first key through the bars. Leo's hand trembled as he picked up the drawing. He looked at the powerful wolf he had drawn, and then at the broken giant in the cage. They were wrong. Everyone was wrong. The quiet understanding between the boy and the dog grew with each passing day. Leo's after-school visits became the anchor of his world. He learned Titan's subtle language. A low rumble in his chest wasn't a growl of aggression, but a sound of deep discomfort, usually when a loud noise echoed from the main kennel. A slight lowering of his head wasn't submission, but an attempt to stretch a muscle in his neck that seemed perpetually tight. Leo noticed that Titan would only eat when the shelter was at its quietest, after the staff had left for the evening and the overnight cleaner was on a different floor. He would push the food bowl with his nose into the dark corner of his enclosure before tentatively taking a few bites. It was the behavior of a creature that felt safe only when it was completely alone and unobserved. One rainy Tuesday, Leo brought a small, soft blanket from his own bed. It was old and worn, smelling of home and fabric softener. He knew he couldn't put it inside the kennel, but he folded it neatly and placed it on the floor just outside the door, hoping the familiar, comforting scent might travel. Titan, who had been lying down, a rare occurrence, lifted his head. He watched Leo with his usual solemnity. He didn't approach the blanket, but he didn't recoil either. He just watched, his amber eyes seeming to absorb the gesture. Leo sat in his usual spot, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the shelter's metal roof a soothing backdrop to their silent communion. He started reading aloud to Titan. He brought his favorite fantasy book, the story of a lone knight on a quest through a dark and dangerous land. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, but in the quiet corridor, it carried. The knight adjusted the heavy armor on his shoulders, Leo read, each movement a reminder of the battles he had fought. He was weary, but his journey was not over. A flicker of hope, small but stubborn, burned within him as he read. Titan did something new. He slowly, painfully, lowered himself to the ground, his back legs collapsing first in an awkward, uncoordinated movement. He let out a soft huff of air and laid his great head on his paws, his eyes fixed on Leo. He wasn't asleep, he was listening. A connection was forming, woven from whispers and patience, a fragile bridge across a chasm of fear and misunderstanding. Leo felt a sense of purpose he'd never known. This silent, suffering dog needed him. Not for food or for walks, but for something far more fundamental, for someone to see him. To truly see him. The more time he spent with Titan, the more he became convinced that the dog's issues were not behavioral, but physical. He watched the way Titan held his body with such rigid care, the way he flinched if he turned too quickly, the way his back legs seemed disconnected from his front. The tremor was always there, a constant, vibrating testament to some hidden agony. He tried to talk to Sarah about it. "I think he's hurt," Leo said one afternoon, his voice filled with a new, uncharacteristic urgency. "Really hurt," Sarah sighed, leaning against the wall. "The vet checked him over when he first came in, Leo. He's physically healthy, according to the report. Just deeply traumatized. Some dogs, they just can't be saved." The words felt like a punch to the gut. They had a report. They had a label. They had filed Titan away in a box marked broken, but Leo had seen the gentle nudge of his nose, the attentive tilt of his ear, the quiet peace in his eyes when he read to him. The report was wrong. The label was a lie. And as Leo looked at Titan, who was now watching him with an expression of profound trust, he knew he couldn't let that lie be the end of the dog's story. He had to find a way to make them listen. The sky had been a bruised purple all afternoon, the air thick and heavy with unspoken promises of a storm. By the time Leo arrived at the shelter, the first fat drops of rain were beginning to fall, streaking the grimy windows. Inside, the change in atmospheric pressure had set the dogs on edge. The barking was frantic, a cacophony of anxiety. As Leo made his way to the back corridor, he could feel the building hum with a nervous energy. Titan was not standing. He was pacing, a stiff, three-step rotation in his small space. Back and forth, back and forth. His breathing was ragged, his sides heaving. The tremor in his hind leg was no longer subtle, his entire back half seemed to vibrate with a violent, uncontrolled shudder. A low, guttural sound of distress escaped his throat with every clap of thunder that rattled the building. Fear. It was pure, undiluted fear. Leo's heart ached for him. He pressed himself as close to the kennel as he dared, his fingers curling around the cold wire mesh. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "It's just a storm, Titan. It'll pass. I'm here." The dog didn't seem to hear him, lost in a private world of terror. Suddenly, the lights flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging the corridor into near darkness, broken only by the emergency lights that cast long, distorted shadows. The dog's barking escalated into a panicked frenzy. In the dim red glow, Leo saw Titan stumble and collapse, his body hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. He was panting, his tongue lolling, his eyes wide with panic. It was in that moment of shared darkness that Leo overheard the two voices from the main office. The shelter manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, and the head vet tech. Their words were sharp, cutting through the noise. "The generator is struggling," Mr. Henderson said, his voice tight with stress. "And this storm is supposed to last all night. We are already at capacity, and Animal Control just called about 3 more strays they are bringing in from the flooding downtown." There was a pause. Then, the vet tech's voice, lower and full of resignation. "We are going to have to make some hard decisions, Bill. We've been putting it off, I know," Mr. Henderson sighed. "Start with the long-termers. The unadoptable ones," and then came the name that made Leo's blood run cold. "What about Titan? He's been here for months. He's taking up a kennel we could use for 2, maybe 3 smaller dogs. We can't keep warehousing him, he's on the list," the tech replied quietly. "We can schedule it for the end of the week, the end of the week." The words were a death sentence. They were going to kill him. They were going to extinguish that quiet, steady soul because he was inconvenient, because they didn't understand him, because they were out of space. A wave of cold fury washed over Leo, so powerful it momentarily silenced his fear. He looked at the terrified dog, shivering on the floor, and then back towards the office where his fate was being decided by strangers who had never seen him gently push a piece of paper with his nose. No. He would not let that happen. The shy, quiet boy who faded into the background was gone. In his place stood someone with a purpose as clear and sharp as lightning. He didn't know how, but he was going to save Titan. His quest was no longer just about understanding the dog's pain, it was now a race against time to save his life. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just broken inside of him. The decision solidified in his mind, hard as diamond. He couldn't wait for others to see what he saw, he had to show them. He spent his entire savings, a meager $87 he'd been collecting for a new video game, on a mission. At the pet store, he bypassed the toys and treats. He found the thickest, most supportive orthopedic bed he could afford, a plush grey rectangle designed to soothe aching joints. He also bought a few cans of the softest, most expensive dog food, the kind that smelled like real stew. He knew it wasn't a solution, but it was a start. It was an offering of comfort, a tangible piece of his hope. He arrived at the shelter the next afternoon, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He found Sarah cleaning kennels, her expression weary. He held up the bag. "Please," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. "Please, just let me put this in his kennel. He's so scared, and he's in pain." I know he is. Sarah looked from Leo's determined face to the items in the bag, and then down the hall toward Titan's enclosure. She chewed on her lip, conflicted. The rules were clear. But she had also seen the quiet boy and the broken dog, day after day. She'd seen the flicker of connection that defied all logic and every line in Titan's official file. Okay, she whispered, making a decision that could cost her her job. Okay, Leo. But I'm coming with you. And we have to be quick. If he shows any aggression, we pull back immediately. Understand? Leo nodded, his throat tight with gratitude. Sarah unlocked the heavy gate, her hand hovering over the latch, ready to slam it shut. The click of the lock was deafeningly loud in the quiet hall. Titan, who had been lying down, scrambled to his feet, his body rigid with alarm. He backed into the far corner, a low, guttural warning rumbling in his chest. Easy, boy, Sarah murmured, her voice calm and steady. It's okay. Leo moved slowly, deliberately, not making eye contact. He knelt down just inside the doorway and gently pushed the orthopedic bed across the floor, towards the corner where Titan stood, trembling. He then opened a can of the soft food, the rich smell of gravy filling the small space. He placed it near the bed. He had done what he came to do. He started to back away, but then he hesitated. Titan's eyes were locked on him, and in them, Leo saw not anger, but a profound, desperate plea. The dog let out a soft whine, a sound so full of misery it was almost human. It was a sound of surrender. Acting on pure instinct, Leo reached his hand out, not to pet him, but just to offer a connection. His fingers hovered in the air for a moment before gently, tentatively, brushing against the fur on Titan's back, right over his hip. And then he felt it. It wasn't the warm, solid feel of a healthy dog. Beneath the thick brindle coat, his fingers met a landscape of wrongness. A series of hard, sharp ridges, like buried stones, ran just under the skin. They were unnatural, lumpy, and clearly a source of immense pain. Titan flinched at the light touch, but didn't pull away. He let out another, longer whine. Sarah, who had crept closer, saw the look on Leo's face. She saw the way the dog's skin moved over the hidden deformities. What is that? She whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Leo looked at her, the pieces of the puzzle finally slamming into place. The stiffness. The tremor. The refusal to be touched. The fear of being handled. It wasn't aggression. It was agony. He's not mean, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion as the devastating truth washed over him. He's been trying to tell us. He's hurt. He's been hurt this whole time. The warning sign on the cage was a lie. The dog's entire history, at the shelter, had been a catastrophic misunderstanding. Titan wasn't a monster to be feared, he was a victim crying for help in the only way he knew how, and for months, no one had listened. The revelation in the kennel sent a shockwave through the shelter. Sarah immediately called for Mr. Henderson and the on-call veterinarian, Dr. Aries. The atmosphere in the hallway shifted from routine weariness to urgent concern. Getting Titan out of the kennel for an examination was a delicate, painstaking process. There was no catch-pole this time. Instead, Leo stood at the open door, speaking in his low, steady murmur, while Dr. Aries, a woman with calm hands and even calmer eyes, approached slowly, armed not with tools of restraint, but with a syringe containing a powerful sedative and pain reliever. Hold on, Titan, Leo whispered, over and over. They are going to help you. Don't give up. It took nearly 30 minutes, but finally, the sedative took hold. Titan's tense body relaxed, his legs giving way as he sank onto the orthopedic bed Leo had brought, his amber eyes fluttering shut. The transport to the small clinic room was a somber affair. 4 staff members carefully lifted the bed, their movements gentle, their faces etched with a new, terrible understanding. Leo trailed behind, feeling helpless. In the brightly lit examination room, the truth became undeniable. As Dr. Aries ran her skilled hands over Titan's sedated body, her professional composure slowly crumbled. Her touch was gentle, but her expression grew grimmer with each discovery. "Oh, you poor, poor soul," she murmured, her fingers tracing the hard ridges along his spine and ribs. She called for immediate X-rays. Leo and Sarah waited in the hallway, the silence between them thick with anxiety. When Dr. Aries finally emerged, she was holding the large, shadowy films up to the light. The images were sickening. Titan's skeleton was a roadmap of cruelty. There were multiple, badly healed fractures along his rib cage. 2 of his vertebrae were compressed, the bones scarred from grinding against each other. But that wasn't the worst of it. The X-rays also revealed dozens of small, dense white specks peppered throughout the muscle and tissue of his back and hindquarters. "Pellets," Dr. Aries said, her voice shaking with barely concealed rage. "He's full of pellets from a pellet gun. They are lodged in his muscles, some of them pressing right up against nerves." She pointed to a particularly dense cluster near his hip. "This is the source of the tremor. Every time he moves, these things are likely causing excruciating, radiating pain. He hasn't been aggressive. He's been defending himself from agony. Anyone touching his back would have felt like a new attack." The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The previous owner hadn't just neglected him, they had tortured him, using him for target practice before dumping him like trash. His reactions at the shelter, the snapping, the growling, the avoidance, were the desperate acts of a creature trying to protect a body that was a constant source of torment. The shelter, understaffed and overwhelmed, had seen a dangerous dog, not a victim in chronic pain. They had written a story of aggression, when the real story was one of unimaginable suffering and survival. Mr. Henderson looked pale. The hard decision, from the night before now seemed monstrous in hindsight. He ran a hand over his face, the weight of the mistake settling on his shoulders. Dr. Aries laid out the options, her voice clinical but compassionate. To give him any chance at a pain-free life, he needs extensive surgery. We'd have to go in, remove as many of the pellets as we can, and potentially perform a spinal fusion to stabilize his vertebrae. It's complex, it's incredibly expensive, and there's no guarantee of a full recovery. The nerve damage might be permanent." She paused, her gaze meeting Mr. Henderson's. "The other option is humane euthanasia," the word hung in the sterile air, cold and final. The cost of the surgery was estimated to be in the thousands, far beyond the shelter's meager budget for a single animal with such a poor prognosis. From a practical standpoint, the choice was obvious. But Leo, standing in the doorway, refused to accept it. He looked at the X-ray, at the ghostly image of the dog who had trusted him, and felt a fire ignite in his chest. "No," he said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "You can't. We can't give up." He looked directly at Mr. Henderson, his shyness completely gone, replaced by a fierce, protective determination. He survived all of this. He waited for someone to listen. Now that we have, we can't just let him die. We have to try. Leo's declaration changed the energy in the room. It was no longer a question of protocol or budget, it was a moral imperative. He became a force of nature, a quiet boy turned passionate advocate. He went home that night not to retreat into his shell, but to gather his weapons, his sketchbook and his pencils. He stayed up late, not drawing wolves or knights, but drawing Titan. He didn't draw the snarling, dangerous animal the shelter had once believed him to be. He drew the truth. He sketched the profound sadness in Titan's amber eyes. He drew the gentle way the dog had nudged the paper back to him. He drew him lying on the orthopedic bed, a single tear leaking from his closed eye. Beneath each drawing, he wrote a few simple words. They called him aggressive. He was just in pain, he was waiting for someone to listen. His name is Titan, and he deserves a chance. The next morning, he took his drawings to school. He showed them to his friends, to his teachers, to anyone who would look. He told the story, his voice quiet but unwavering. His parents, who had been watching their withdrawn son blossom with this newfound purpose, were stunned and deeply moved. They saw the change in him, the passion that had replaced his timidity. His father, a graphic designer, helped him scan the drawings and set up a simple web page with a fundraising link. His mother, a teacher, helped him write the text, telling the full story of the misunderstanding, the discovery, and the race against time to fund the life-saving surgery. The campaign began small. Leo put up flyers with his drawings at the local library, the grocery store, and the veterinary clinic. He stood outside the shelter on the weekend, not asking for money, but simply showing people his drawings and telling Titan's story. Sarah and other sympathetic shelter staff shared the online fundraiser on their social media pages. The story of the dangerous dog and the shy boy who saw his pain began to resonate with the small community. The first donations were small, $5, $10, $20. But they were followed by comments filled with encouragement. "Thank you for listening to him, Leo. Every life is worth saving. We are rooting for you." Titan, the local news station, tipped off by Sarah, picked up the story. They ran a short segment featuring Leo's drawings, an interview with a remorseful Mr. Henderson, and a shot of the sleeping Titan, still recovering in the clinic. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured in, not just from their town, but from all over the state, then the country. People were moved by the story of profound misjudgment and the simple, intuitive compassion of a child. It was a story about looking closer, about challenging labels, about the responsibility to listen to those who cannot speak for themselves. Within 72 hours, they had surpassed their goal. The surgery was on. Leo sat by Titan's side in the hours leading up to the procedure, the dog now awake, but groggy from pain medication. He rested his hand gently on Titan's head, a place free from injury. "You're going to be okay," Leo whispered, the promise now backed by a community of hope. "So many people believe in you. You just have to hold on." Titan, as if understanding, leaned his heavy head into the boy's touch, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fight. The day of the surgery was the longest of Leo's life. Dr. Aries had enlisted the help of a specialist veterinary surgeon from a nearby city. The procedure was scheduled to take 6 hours, but it stretched into 8, then 9. Leo waited in the shelter's small, stuffy break room, his parents with him. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sit still. He paced the small room, his mind replaying every moment with Titan, from the first time he saw him standing like a statue to the feel of the broken bones beneath his fur. He took out his sketchbook, the pages filled with the dog who had changed his life. He tried to draw, but his hands were shaking. Instead of drawing Titan as he was, he began to sketch him as he hoped he would be, running through a field of tall grass, his body whole and powerful, his tail a blurry plume of joy. He drew him chasing a ball, playing with another dog, sleeping peacefully in a sunbeam. He was drawing a future, willing it into existence with graphite and paper. Finally, late in the evening, Dr. Aries appeared in the doorway. Her scrubs were stained, her face etched with exhaustion, and her expression was unreadable. Leo's heart stopped. His mother put a protective arm around his shoulders. "How is he?" Leo's father asked, his voice strained. Dr. Aries took a deep breath. "He's a fighter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The damage was extensive. Far worse than the X-rays showed. We removed over 40 pellets. We had to rebuild a section of his hip, and we fused 2 of his vertebrae. There were a few moments we weren't sure he was going to make it." His heart stopped on the table. Leo felt the room tilt, the air sucked from his lungs. His mother's grip tightened. "But we got him back," Dr. Aries continued quickly, a small, tired smile finally breaking through. "He's stable. He's in recovery. He pulled through." Relief washed over Leo so intensely it made him dizzy. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands as silent tears of gratitude and exhaustion streamed down his face. Titan was alive. He had held on. The next few weeks were a delicate, arduous journey of healing. Titan's recovery was slow. He was weak, his body a patchwork of stitches and shaved fur. He was on a constant drip of pain medication, and for the first few days, he did little more than sleep. But he was no longer in the isolated kennel in the back. He was in the main clinic, in a warm, quiet recovery suite, on the very orthopedic bed Leo had bought for him. And Leo was there every single day. As soon as school ended, he would go straight to the shelter and sit with Titan for hours. At first, he just sat, his quiet presence a comfort. Then, as Titan grew stronger, he started reading to him again, his voice a low, soothing murmur against the beeping of the monitors. He read The Hobbit, The Chronicles of Narnia, and all his favorite stories of epic journeys and unlikely heroes. During one visit, about a week after the surgery, Leo was reading when he felt a wet nudge against his hand. He looked down. Titan had lifted his heavy head and was pushing his nose into Leo's palm. His amber eyes, once clouded with pain and fear, were clear and bright. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 words. It was thanks. It was trust. It was love. With daily physical therapy, Titan began the slow process of learning to use his body again. The first time he stood on his own, his legs trembling with the effort, the entire shelter staff cheered. The violent tremor was gone, replaced by a slight, occasional twitch. He started taking a few hesitant steps, then a few more. Leo was his shadow, his constant source of encouragement. "You can do it, Titan," he'd whisper, walking alongside him. Just one more step and Titan, fueled by the boy's unwavering faith, would take it. Months passed. The seasons turned. The brindle dog, once sentenced to death, became the shelter's beloved mascot, and a testament to second chances. But his journey wasn't over. One sunny Saturday, Leo's parents came to the shelter with him. They filled out a stack of paperwork, their faces beaming. They weren't there to pick up the friendly golden retriever. They were there for Titan. Leo decided his old name, a name associated with so much pain and loneliness, no longer fit. As they walked him out of the shelter for the last time, into the bright, open world, Leo looked up at the vast blue sky. "Orion," he said softly. "Like the hunter in the stars." The protector, the dog, as if hearing his new name, nudged Leo's hand and licked his face, the first time he had ever offered such an open display of affection. What began as a dreaded trip to a noisy shelter became the foundation of a new life for both of them. Orion, the dog who was never supposed to be touched, now slept every night at the foot of Leo's bed, his body a warm, solid weight of reassurance. The scars on his body remained, a permanent map of his past, but the fear in his eyes was gone forever, replaced by an expression of deep, unwavering devotion. And Leo, the quiet, overlooked boy, had found his voice. He was no longer invisible. He was the boy who listened to silence, the boy who saw the pain behind the warning signs, the boy who fought for a life everyone else had discarded. He learned that true strength wasn't about being the loudest person in the room, it was about having the courage to stand up for those with no voice at all. On a warm summer evening, Leo sat in his backyard, leaning against Orion's solid frame. The dog rested his heavy head in the boy's lap, letting out a soft sigh of pure contentment. The journey had been long and fraught with fear, but it had led them here, to this moment of perfect peace. It's a powerful reminder that behind every label, every warning, every judgment, there is a story. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stop, to look closer, and to listen with their heart. The greatest heroes are often the quietest ones, and the most profound connections are forged not in grand gestures, but in the silent spaces, where one soul simply recognizes the pain of another. Thank you for sharing in their journey. If their story touched you, please consider sharing it, so that more people are reminded to look for the Orion in every Titan they meet.